Good morning, everyone. Yesterday, we began a two-session series on what my artist friends and I will be doing over the next couple of years as Confluence 24-25. And I would urge you to watch the second half of that today, which is going to be at 1 o'clock Eastern time today. And if you want to see what we did yesterday, which was the introductory session, this is the link which will take you to yesterday's program. And you can just watch it. For some reason, it's taking you to the middle of it. But in any case, that is the link to yesterday's program. And, it might be beneficial if you weren't there yesterday to please take a look at that rather than this session, which you can watch another time. But today's session will be live. It will be with Colleen Kibert and Tim Holmes as moderators. And we will be working with some of the people who attended our confluence in the past. But the particular reason to watch is because we are looking for other artists in the world, anywhere in the world, who are interested in accessing the unconscious, understanding what it means to access the unconscious, and then to describe their process as an artist. Um, I think if you've been watching this program for quite a few years, you will have realized that Dr. Jung was all about the unconscious and how the collective unconscious works in the world. And you'll also know that I've made the observation that uh, this quote from Dr. Lawrence Jaffe really sums up not only Jungian psychology, but all religions and what they do. And so accessing the unconscious is very important, and we need to understand it. So I'm going to read the quote. The quote is, "The purpose of Jung's whole psychology is to make accessible to us that healing power which resides in our unconscious." So the whole of Jung's psychology is to make accessible the healing power of the unconscious, and we all have this healing power. We access it in different ways. Now, if you take the Abrahamic religions, they started to develop at a time, maybe 1500 years before Christ, at least, maybe more, when the Jewish community was under the rule of the Egyptians in Egypt. And over many millennia now, that religion has developed, those three religions have developed, and through lots of strife and quarrels and bloodshed and you name it. And that continues to this day, as we know, because um, the Gaza-Israeli war is a perfect example of it. But the reality is that that all these religions and every world religion does one thing, and that is give us access to the healing power of the unconscious. So when you are praying, you are actually trying to activate the healing power that is within you. Okay. Um, and Jung finally realized this a century ago and started to write about it, but it's hard to get a handle on it. And so there've been lots of misunderstandings. And so uh, we want to make sure that you understand that we're not proposing this as a substitute religion, not at all. And actually, we're not proposing, in this case, Jungian psychology at all. We're proposing a different approach in this session this afternoon, accessing the unconscious, um, which is to do it through artwork. And it can be done with any art whatsoever. And it simply works to give us healing. Okay, whether we go to a rock concert or you name it, um, doing something as a collective has a healing power to it. And we people of the 60s, among whom I am one, can look back to the Beatles, to Elvis Presley, and to many others, the Stones, and say um, that we know that this healing power was there back in the rock days of the 60s, and it continues on. Um, and so today we're talking about how we do it on art. And you can see the first session of this at the link that I have put into the chat on YouTube, so that you can understand what it is we're talking about. And then this afternoon, we will be doing the second session, which is going to include all those that attended our confluences in the past. And then starting in September, we're going to open this to the world, to people who've now had an opportunity to think about the application of art as a method of accessing the unconscious as a healing power. and and I mean by that all art, whether it's ballet or sculpture or what have you, songs, rock concerts, you name it. Um, all those things provide us with a healing power, the healing power of the unconscious. They give us access to the healing power. And so art is one more method to reach that. You can get part of that healing power by simply going to a museum and walking around and seeing what other artists have done over centuries and millennia. But a very effective way to open this access to the healing power is by doing something yourself, not because you want to um, be a great artist who's going to sell a lot of work, but just for yourself. Because I've found that when I do art, whether or not it's good art or not is a different question, but when I do art, I find it very healing for me. And so, welcome, Jordan.
All right.
Sorry, I got started and I had to keep going.
No,
Um,
I was running 10 minutes late. And then, of course, when you have that, then there's oh, you're signing in. And did you mistype the password? Zoom's being kind of a bear. So,
mhm.
anyway,
So anyway, here we are, and we will be back online again Maybe Jordan won't be back online. I can't say, but I will be back online um, at 1 p.m. today with the Confluence groups. It's at a different link if you want to join the panel. Uh, and I guess I don't have that link handy, but before I hang up, I will provide that. But anyway, if you watch our live sessions on YouTube, you will find it on YouTube. You just won't be able to participate in the panel. You can participate by asking questions and making comments on YouTube, though. And thank you, Susan, for being here at midnight, Melbourne time. Good gracious. Okay. So today we're going to start an essay entitled C.G.Jung and the Prophet Puzzle by Lance Owens. And it's from this book. Let's see if I can get myself back on the screen here. There we go. Here's the book. Jung's Red Book for Our Time, Searching for Soul Under Postmodern Conditions by Mary Stein and Thomas Arst. And we're working with the various essays that are found in this book. Lance Owens is a very well-known early Jungian analyst. He was already quite a made man by the year 2000, and he's an elderly man now, but he has been instrumental in many things in the Jungian world for decades. And so his wisdom here is of use. So we're talking about C.G. Jung and the Prophet Puzzle is the name of his essay. And you have your book, Jordan? Yep. Okay, here we go. The Red Book, Liber Novus, is a volume that defies categorization or comparison. It resounds with voices beyond our common ken. Though a singularly modern document, it is nevertheless transcribed and presented in the form of a medieval manuscript. And since its belated publication in 2009, it has proved to be a work that perplexes most people who venture into its visionary domain. Whether one approaches Liber Novus as a historian, a psychologist, a literary critic, or simply as an interested reader, the puzzle is the same. What was Carl Jung doing? What was happening to him? Is this record to be interpreted as an imaginative literary creation, the product of an incipient psychosis, or a psychological work veiled in prophetic language? Of course, Liber Novus is none of those latter things. To meet this book, one must apprehend that C.G. Jung elaborated Liber Novus in the form of a revelation. It is a message to mankind at a critical juncture in human history. This is a visionary work in the most fundamental sense of those words. Jung fashioned the book from his journal accounts of visionary and imaginative experiences, events he originally chronicled between 1913 and 1916, although he labored at the calligraphically transcribing the text into his illuminated red leather folio volume for over 16 years. And though he asserted the book was the foundation of all of his work, it is a manuscript he chose never to publicly disclose. He knew it would not be understood by men of his time. Now, nearly 100 years later, it has finally been revealed. Will people of this time understand it? Can this age comprehend a man who experienced and carefully recorded visions, ultimately regarded them as a revelation, and recognized in them the prophecy of a vast coming age. Okay, Jordan, do you have a comment here?
Well, it reminds me of the participatio mystique and that whole process where I think one of the key things I find is there's a silence when you have full immersion, are fully immersed in yourself, and just you then are your context and you are in your context, and there's a purity of that where then you literally pour. And I think the whole water bearer idea becomes we're walking around in a sense as an empty vessel, like the water bearer. It's an Aquarius air sign. So what gives with the water? But the Aquarius magic is that it understands the magic of condensation. You just hold the vessel up, everything you need's in the air, and the water consolidates together. So that I think this whole the revelation part of the Red Book is a very gigantic example of what can happen when you just experience consciously silence so that the unconscious can be given its voice.
Righto. And of course, we're uh, thinking about thinking about the Red Book. The term Liber Novus is it means new book, and it was an appellation that Jung gave to it, but it's commonly referred to as the Red Book because it was a red, basically a scrapbook. You could call it a scrapbook, which Jung purchased an empty scrapbook that was leather bound, red leather bound, and it's very large. And he then worked on building it up over many, many years. And so I think I have a photograph of the actual, yep, I do. Here's an image of the actual Red Book that I'll share with you.
It's funny, it just came to me. The Red Book is the vehicle of his inner workings, and then his red Mercedes is his literal vehicle on his outer movements.
Yeah, absolutely. So, so here is the Red Book as it existed in a vault in Zurich for uh, over 40 years after Jung's death, or almost 50 years, 48 years. And as you can see by this photograph of the original volume, it doesn't say the Red Book, or it doesn't say Liber Novus on it, the new book. And I have resisted the idea that that is a correct term for it because Jung referred to this throughout his life as the Red Book, and everybody knew it was the Red Book. So I know that I don't know, some people involved with this book think of it as kind of the New Testament or something, but that isn't what it is. And um,
I've always been with you on that, and I kind of wonder if the capital B book being the Bible, that that's all a lot about. Well, it's inner divinity. I mean, but everyone seems to take it as external divinity.
right.
And what's interesting to hear the new book would be okay, the Bible of self. And but I like the fact just the Red Book because it takes out the metaphor, it takes out the reading in between the lines, which can be rude in a way where just what did someone say? Not, oh, what are you trying to mean? And because there's a kind of a hyper vigilance when people are trying to read things in all the time. And I think there's, oh, yeah, you say this and you meant that. not everything's ironic, and most things are actually, the crayon is purple, the desk is wood, and so I
Yeah,
think the red book is simply, Jack ran through the forest. The red book is actually a wonderful seed to not read anything into, but to be able to continually germinate from. Whereas
absolutely.
Liber Novus, that's okay. Intent is important, but I think intention can be overrated. It's more important the way it comes across.
Yeah, and I don't feel that the Red Book per se is a New Testament in any way. I mean, it's Jung's personal visions and some of his artwork that he did during this 16-year period, and especially during the first 10 weeks of it on
Hmm.
when he began writing it down on Christmas Day of 1913 into his black books, into his clinical notes about his own experiment. Um, he didn't think he was writing a New Testament of any kind. And
Yeah.
honestly, he didn't really know what he was doing. I think he finally did as he went forward, and he came clean on that later on. Um, and in an understandable way, in a letter that he wrote to the Reverend David Cox in 1957. I've read that letter into this YouTube channel, so you can find that letter. It's a letter to Reverend David Cox from August of 1957, where he really talked about what he was up to. And so
I think too that he was just doing what he does, meticulously recording as a doctor.
yeah,
And the black books were the notes, and the red book were harvesting the gold nuggets from the notes. In a sense, what's the diagnosis? How does this pathology present? And he was simply recording the inner experiential journey that he was fearlessly taking. Even if he was afraid all the time, he was fearless to stay in there. I mean, it's like when danger's there, step into it. It's the first part of courage.
yeah,
And it doesn't mean be dumb,
yeah,
don't.
right, exactly.
There's 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 naivete, and then there's leadership, but um it's the kind of thing where I think this is just him meticulously doing what he meticulously did, is record.
Right.
And
And
black book,
I'm
yeah.
yeah, and I'm eternally grateful to Dr. Lawrence Jaffe, who died in 2003. Unfortunately, I would have loved to speak with him, but he was the son of Agnella Jaffe, who wrote Memories, Dreams, Reflections with Jung, who recorded it for him. And and created the protocols for that, which we may get the protocols later this year or early next year, perhaps. I know they're in the works. And the issue is that Memories, Dreams, Reflections represents a seriously edited version of their interaction, of Agnella Jaffe's interaction with Jung. And about 50% of the so-called protocols, which were between Jung and Agnella Jaffe, was left out of Memories, Dreams, Reflections. So, and that was apparently at the request of the family. But now that all the main actors are dead, um, we can talk about it, and it can be published. And so I'm looking forward to seeing that later this year. But the point of Jaffe's quote, which I'll say again, the purpose of Jung's whole psychology is to make accessible to us that healing power which resides in our unconscious. the healing power which resides in our unconscious. And that's what caused me to have a light bulb go on and say, that's what all religions do. They give us access to the healing power that resides in our own unconscious. And, uh, as I look back on my experiences as a boy with Christianity and later with all kinds of religions, including Shinto and Buddhism in Japan, when I was in my teens. Um, and I finally realized, and Jung never said this, but I realized that was the purpose of all these religions. That's the purpose of all meditation. It's the purpose of all prayer. And when we ask people to pray for us as a group, we're asking for the a collective unconscious thing that will make a difference to somebody. And it will provide a healing power to the whole nation and the world actually. And so you know people who are mansplainers, right, uh have and people involved in the scientific method, they all want to say, oh no, that's nothing, that it's nothing but this, but that's not true. Okay, and the problem with the scientific method is that science has never discovered how the rules of nature were established. Science has discovered the rules of nature and through experimentation found what they are, to the point of understanding how the world works um, on a rules-based system that we can all understand. And so that's allowed us to develop this world, marvelous or not, that we currently have. But no scientist ever created a new rule. They only discovered the rules. That's what they discovered through the scientific method. And so when you're listening to a rule that some scientist gives you, beware, because that's not his or her rule. That's a rule of nature, and and we
That's
don't
a
know,
really,
and we
yeah,
don't know how those rules of nature were created. We don't know, uh, and
yeah,
that's
because that's
that's the
really good.
mystery.
That's a really good point because that, pardon me, that rule, quote unquote rule, add big scare quotes to it. Um, that rule was at one point an anecdotal observation,
Sure.
and sometimes it reminds me of a philosopher I had at my table 3 years ago, and something got him going, and I let him run. That's good. That's the point. And um, but it was this flowery New York Times art critic, giant, huge, long sentence. I mean, it was like a 2.5 minute sentence. I kind of don't think there was a paragraph. I think it was sentence one. And
Mhm.
when he finished, he was all proud of himself. Like, look what I did, and he said, "So what do you think about that?" And I said, "I think that makes way too much sense to be worth a damn."
Amen.
And his wife starts laughing, and it got you there. And what happened is, I said, "Cool. So now you got all that alluvium out. What's your real message in
Right.
10 words or less?" And he said what it was. But I think because I respected the process and let it run, but disrespected the hubris of, look how amazing I am. But I still hold it as one of my reverse comedy heckler. I don't know. Usually I would have not responded that way. But I think it was so over the top that even I was going, wow, that you really give new definition to blue, and I can talk a blue mile. So
Yeah. So whenever you're hearing somebody mansplaining a um, a rule of nature, just remember he didn't create it.
yeah,
Uh,
and I always think when they do that, I always sit there inside going, it's okay. Weather washes through. The storm won't last forever.
yeah,
He'll stop soon enough.
right. And Sherry says she's been listening to the Confluence 24, which we started yesterday, and which the link is on the YouTube chat. And she says, "What a difference a day makes." It was a it was a day that was filled with revelations and understanding about what art does for us, all kinds of art. And so, if you haven't watched that, I would recommend that you watch that video. That it's 90 minutes uh, before our 1 p.m. today, 10 a.m. Pacific time uh, follow-up session when we're going to be working with other artists. Yesterday, we worked with the organizers of the Confluence, and each of us showed our procedure, what we are doing to get access to the unconscious. And so starting today, we're going to be working with people who have attended our formal two confluences in Helena, Montana, and Mount Madonna, California, the last couple of years. And then, and this is going to be demonstrations. And then um, in September, starting September 8th, we're going to be doing it with any artist in the world. So I urge you, if you have a work of art, you're only going to be presenting one, but you can use that one to describe how you access your own unconscious using that work of art. Um, and and so that's what we're up to. We're trying to help people understand the value of the unconscious, the healing power. And so that's what we're going to be doing again live at 1 o'clock today, U.S. Eastern Time, 10 o'clock Pacific Time. Okay, so now let's go on. So here's Lance Owens again. Vision, revelation, prophecy. How will the spirit of this time decipher such archaic words, and how will coming generations meet this strange tone, elaborated as a revelation and implicitly addressed as a message to them? I cannot prophesy how the future will view this book, but I do know that Liber Novus and the life work of C.G.Jung are inextricably intertwined. Any understanding of Liber Novus inevitably demands an engagement with Jung and his tireless efforts toward awakening modern consciousness to the ancient and mysterious fact of the world. Okay, so that any further comment there, Jordan?
Just one that came to me, rather than Liber Novus being a Bible, this is the book of you. And it's an admonition, pardon me, an admonition to do this yourself and track yourself. Because I think it's when you do that, sometimes you get to some point in life and you realize there's huge change going on. You're comfortable with the not knowing. You have no idea what's going on, but you can stay the course because you realize you're in a milestone in the moment, might be lasting a whole season, except instead of trying to solve it with all your previous expectations, you can experience it and live it into being, and then that's your new next chapter in the book. So I think that Liber Novus is a real nod to do this yourself, your life, your way. And there's literally a self-reflection that goes on when you look back and go, oh, that's what I was saying. That it was pouring from the unconscious in ways that were not understandable at the time. So allowing reason to be unreasonable. And so anyway, that just last thought of, Liber Novus being your book.
Right. Okay. So we're going on now. Every place that Lance Owens mentions Liber Novus, he's also saying the Red Book. That's what the Liber Novus is. And so going on now. The hermeneutics of vision, and I never remember what the meaning of hermeneutics is. Can you define it, Jordan?
It's the language of philosophy that deals with interpretation.
Okay.
So interpreting vision. This would be basically how to interpret vision.
Yep. And right. Okay. Cameron says that seems to have come to fruition culturally. I'm thinking of Bernardo Kastrup's metaphysical idealism and the growing emergence of Western animism. Okay. I don't have a comment on that. I'm familiar with Eastern animism, which is the Shinto religion. That's the most pure animistic religion these days, in which everything in the universe is sacred. Okay, starting with the mountains, but everything else as well.
Okay. Well, and that's a statement to me. I'd say that every philosophy is just one fish scale on the fish, and it's all about trying to describe nature. But like you look at Heidegger, look at Anais Nin. Some people are more akin to nature, say Anais Nin, whereas you get Schopenhauer. Okay, he's dealing with imagination and inner, but you start to get some philosophers, and it's just them mansplaining their way of trying to make some sense of I control my world. And the thing about that is
not I control my world, but I can understand my world, maybe.
Yeah, and I
by
think
this logic.
Yeah, the whole know thyself above the door. You walk into your first philosophy class. That's putting people off the path right off the beginning. Because if you ask me if I know myself, if I was a sapphire and I could speak English, I would roll my eyes at you and just continue to live and do what sapphires do. And I would not say anything because do I know myself? No matter what my level of expertise is at driving, I navigate my car. I do not control my car. I hope I don't get out of control, but I navigate. And I think if we navigate ourselves, navigate our life, that's really getting to operating from yourself instead of always looking back at yourself. Because I think the know thyself gets a little bit too much to be rumination. And that just grows the past instead of living in the present. So even in terms of interpretation, I try not to interpret my everyday experience. I'm not going to interpret why am I enjoying this butterfly? Why did that flower give me tingles? I'm just going to experience it. So I think there's a point of too much forced consciousness. I can't explain what just happened and why.
Well, I mean, the scientific method is trying to explain what just happened and why, but we never created the reason, actually. We could only describe it.
And I think that's just gas in the gas tank. It's like you explain why and the reason why, And then the thing is, that's not all stop. That's
Mhm.
just that's the nugget. That's the fuel. Just add water will live that into being. Use that knowledge as a utility, a tool,
Yeah.
but not, oh, I know this and so I'm done. I'm on high and I got all this. And it's no, it's I find that a lot of people take the reason as a kind of all stop finish, a completion. Whereas that's like a really petty goal. And you finish it, it's just checking off something on the grocery list. Whereas with like um, Jaffe's quote, the healing to access the healing power of the unconscious, how do we complete things that are then generative? The idea being a woman gives birth to a child, she completed the birth and the life is generative. So, literally, making things that are alive in our life rather than checking things off a grocery list.
Precisely. Yeah. And we can't explain how it works,
Right.
right? I mean, we can't explain why it works or what the rules are. We can only explain how it works in most cases, right?
Yeah, I don't have to be a mechanic to drive my car. That's what mechanics are for. It's
Right,
like,
right, exactly. And so anyway, so so I made this comment here because uh, there were some comments on YouTube, and I said philosophies are all rationalism to describe mysteries we don't understand. Humans never created any of the rules; we only discovered the rules. And Cameron says that forced stuff really inhibits active imagination. I've only just begun learning August moon, that August moon. Thank you for the invite. I hope to come up with something from my photo works. Okay, that'll be great. Um, that's
and
from
I'd
August.
add your statement
Yeah,
about all rationalism, add to that the wisdom of the ages lives within. Why do we keep coming up with these similar ideas and then modifying them and evolving them? Even the idea of the earth as the center of the universe, that's just a notion of you're the center of your world. But then when you expand it and realize there are more people that are also the center of their world, and then you realize you're all on a different world called the earth. I mean, it evolves, but that all came from within. And just what's your perception of your experience of that inner wisdom?
yeah. So, okay, so I'm going to read on now. So, the hermeneutics of vision. Dr. C.G. Jung certainly struggled with his own understanding of the visionary and imaginative experience that erupted in the fall of 1913 and continued nearly nightly into the spring of 1914. As we've discussed, it's about 10 weeks of information that came out of him at that time. And that's about 80% of the Red Book. Early on, he accepted the possibility that it might be a path into insanity. It began in October 1913 with two separate spontaneous visions of a wave of blood consuming Europe. Confronted with prolonged visual hallucinations, Jung conceded that interior powers he could neither resist nor ignore were demanding his attention. He interpreted his predicament, firstly in personal terms, as a summons to engage lost, rejected, or hidden aspects of himself. In the opening words of his journal on 12 November 1913, he petitioned a reunion with his almost forgotten soul. Throughout 4 subsequent weeks of rigorous nightly introspection, a voice from the depths began to answer him. He listened. Okay. So as we've said, at this point in his career, Dr. Jung did not know what was happening to him. He was a made psychiatrist. He was already practicing psychiatry, and he had worked in Bergholzli which was an old style insane asylum in Zurich for a decade. He had actually lived in the Bergholzli with his family for most of that time, where he could be closer to his patients. And so when these visions started to come to him, he wondered if he was having a problem with his own sanity. And quite understandable, because these were very, very powerful visions. And so it's only later on that he starts to work it out for himself, what it all means. And fortunately, he was a brilliant man whose IQ was way beyond most average people. And he had been brought up in the church because his father was a Swiss Reformed pastor. And so he already knew a lot of classical knowledge before this started to happen to him. And it started when he was about 40. So, Jordan?
I was going to say this comes to the Jung's quote of, all life up to 40 is just research. And what's interesting is he then had the clarity of mind to realize something's happening. I have no idea what's happening, but he didn't shy away from it. And I think this, to me, really supports my concept that the midlife crisis is a myth. He's just simply undergoing the second primary rite of passage.
Yeah.
The adolescence to adulthood, the child becomes the parent of the adult, and you live your life for 20 or so more years. Well, what happens then, I think, is then you come to 40 to 42, and then you are almost responsible to be required to birth the rest of your life your way. So, and whether you self-induce the rite of passage or it just happens, even astrologically, I call the age 42 the Ebenezer transit. So think your Christmas Carol, on Christmas past and reflection, where you have a Neptune square, and Neptune just simply is Poseidon, oceanic, boundaryless, expansive. But expansive has no sense of itself. But at 42, you get a square because it's 1/4 of the orbit of Neptune. Well, that's a hard, structural, specific, rational angle. What happens is Neptune, your expansiveness, sees itself for the first time, and look at the mirror. Who's that? Kind of like a cat. You attack the mirror, or what happens? It's also your Uranus opposition, and that's the tectonic undercurrents in your life. So your magma and your plates are starting to erupt through you. And at that point, you birth the rest of your life. And so I think this point at 40, he then takes on the second profession, being himself, instead of, being led by the nose, by the rules and whatever you've bought into. So I really feel this is Jung's coming of age story in the Red Book, except it's not trying to get a certificate. Validation is just for parking. You don't need honors. It's a matter of living your life your way. And he really, as we both know, that's what he
really
did.
that. Yep,
Yeah,
absolutely.
he really did that.
Okay, so Owens goes on, as a physician.
Your video froze.
The journal in clinical terms, calling it the book of my most difficult experiment. In this,
actually, your video froze right as you started the paragraph.
Okay, I'll start again. As a physician with extensive clinical training, he committed himself to keeping a contemporaneous and carefully documented record of his nightly endeavors. In December 1913, 2 months after beginning his exploration, Jung described in the journal in clinical terms, calling it the book of my most difficult experiment. In this and the 5 journal volumes that followed, he meticulously narrated what he saw and heard and what he said in response. It was an experiment, a perilous journey of discovery into unknown psychic terrain. 10 years later, Carrie Baines recorded Jung's description of his approach to the imaginative encounters, recounted to her privately in 1924. Quote, you said some of it hurt your sense of fitness of things terribly, and that you had shrunk from putting it down as it came to you, but that you had started on the principle of voluntariness, that is, of making no corrections, and so you had stuck to that, quote unquote. Jung's initial interpretive challenge was putting it down as it came, recording in his journal the voice of the depths in dialogue, in visionary scene, and in image. This was an extraordinary initial hermeneutic task. He described his effort at the outset of Liber Novus, quote, I speak in images. With nothing else can I express the words from the depths. Okay, I want to stop there for a minute because what Edward Edinger explained to us is that reading Jung is like getting a fruitcake or a cheese ball because every paragraph is like a cheese ball. And in the sense that you don't really know what you're getting until you sort of bite into it. And this is true basically of every paragraph that Jung wrote through his life. And so instead of having a linear explanation of things that we normal human beings are used to seeing, he would write a paragraph that sort of circumnavigated the center of the paragraph. And so the interesting thing that I discovered, back when Twitter was brand new, I read somewhere that somebody was tweeting out all the verses of the Bible, one verse at a time. And so I was getting involved in Twitter at that time, and I realized that if I tweeted out the sentences of the Red Book, when I finished it, it would be in reverse order. It would be in the wrong order because the earliest one would be at the bottom, and so the sentences would be in the wrong order. So I was reading the Red Book into Twitter, and I started to read. I take a paragraph, about 5 sentences, let's say, and I would read them in reverse order. Okay, in other words, I would start from the last sentence and go backward so that when it was finished on Twitter, it would be in the correct order. And what I found, much to my surprise, was that it means absolutely the same thing in both directions.
Yeah, it's completely reflexive.
Right. And so that's that. Okay.
I think it's interesting, this paragraph, especially with regards to the hermeneutics, and then my comment before of, know thyself, beware the trickster of interpretation with vision. It's more important to experience what you are seeing internally, externally, and I call it yellow car syndrome. If I go outside looking for yellow cars, what do you think I'm going to find? If I go outside looking for trouble, what am I going to find? Yellow car, trouble. But if I go for a walk and I'm just going for a walk, I might see a butterfly I've never seen before, or a flower, or a rock, or bump into somebody. And there's a cleanliness to a lack of interpretation experientially when you just experience. And so I think there's a difficulty that's hidden in this paragraph in the creative process of oftentimes as we're creating, we also start to edit as if we have to have a finished product. But I think pouring out, like this is what I like about participation mystique and Colleen's process is you're pouring out the contents. Later, after they're poured, they cure, they dry, paint dries, but language never. You can do the languaging after. So instead of interpreting while you're pouring, just pour. And
Yeah.
I think that's important with, we look at the hermeneutics of vision or the interpretation of vision. It's important to see, period, first, not interpret while we're doing it. Now, if I'm on point and I'm out there on the bleeding edge of something, well, I probably better be interpreting everything as it's coming because my life depends on it.
Mm-hmm. Surely.
But
And
that's an extreme example. And I don't think in life we're that much on point all the time, or we are. And instead of that tiring us out, always being on, actually, I prefer to always be a little off. And so I can pull myself out of the way. And honestly, it's like my table. It's not my stuff that's going to be there. My job is to get them to speak. And they explore their inner nature through the images, not me going this. I can pepper with this, that, and the other along as we go. But
sure.
if I'm a talking head, that's all hermeneutics. And that sounds kind of dorky. That means I'm not very professional. I'm just actually mansplaining.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So it occurred to me some time ago now that what we're doing every Sunday when we do these readings and commentary is that we are making available to you, the listener, on this video, both live and afterward in a recording, we're making your unconscious available to you. Okay, giving you access to your unconscious. And we're doing it by expressing what comes up from our unconscious as we go. And so that's why when I finish one of these sessions, I never can remember what we've been talking about because it all comes raw out of my unconscious. And the only way that you can absorb it is by letting that affect you in a way that causes your unconscious to open up as well. And so you start to say, oh yeah, he said that, and it could mean this, and so on. And we see that going on the YouTube chat right now, where people are talking about different things that they refer to.
I think in that regard, it's important too. And with this statement, I don't intend to unburden myself with the responsibility to attempt to be clear.
Right.
But if you don't understand something someone says, sometimes it's not about the comprehension. It is about the feeling. And when you feel that, you can almost forget their words because that's the seed husk that germinated something for you. And
Right.
in that sense, it's the inspirational piece that is I'm not going to say illogical, it's natural. And so I think we almost oftentimes, I'm guilty of this, get too much into making a geometry proof or making a legal brief or a fact structure about where's this conversation going. Well, then that means I'm waiting for my turn to talk. I mean, it's
Yeah.
how this thing makes sense, rather than what's the next step. And we're going on a road trip together. And I think so. Sometimes I find when someone says something and it's absolute gibberish, but it moves me, then I realize it was kind of the metaphor of experience rather than a metaphor composed of words. And
Yeah,
I could, oh,
exactly.
well, oh, that prompts this. What do you feel about? And then what's funny is oftentimes they'll say something and go, oh, you really got that. And what it was is that I absolutely did not get it, but I didn't judge them for that, and I didn't try to look at my attention hound trying to show how much I can see through the genius of this statement, and I understand none of that stuff. Where then it's literally a road trip where if the music sucks, you just reach over and change it. You don't ask. Like, you're with your
Right,
friend, so, or your partner, and so you just look at them and roll your eyes, and you're like, no, that's enough of this. We can move to the next now.
right. And there's some good things coming up here on the YouTube chat. August Moon asks, during this time of personal experiments, were there colleagues who worked closely with Jung and accompanied him in these experiments, or was he offline and went on a hermit mode during those times? Okay, well, he did have one colleague, and that was um, Tony Wolfe, who was working with him on what all the images meant. And as Emma Jung said later in her life, um, Tony was able to keep him on track when these things were going on. And it's important to realize that the human species didn't learn to write and to um, do things in this logical manner we call writing until very, very late in our development. Everything in all species has been developed on vision, on images that we see in our mind. So when we talk about things, you're not seeing the words, you're seeing whatever image comes to your mind from the words. And so um, so Jung was seeing these images. And the way I know that is because when I wrote my novel in 1993, this was before I'd seen the Red Book. Um, and it was only when I got the Red Book in 2009 that I realized, oh, that's how the greatest psychologists of the 20th century did it. So I guess I'm not crazy, right? Uh, but um, but I never saw any of the words going onto the screen when I was writing. I saw the images and was describing the images as they occurred. And I realized later that this is the way a great novelist does operate. So, for example, Ernest Hemingway, when asked how he wrote a novel, he said, well, I slit my wrist and bleed.
Well, yeah, I think
Yeah,
The Tony Wolfe character part in this story is also goes along the lines of I always forget the name, James Joyce and his daughter, where James Joyce asks Jung to see his daughter. She's struggling, and Jung comes back with, James, she drowns in the depths you so easily swim,
yeah,
which is then him learning she's modeling her dad, and she needs to get to that's cool intensity, but find your own depths.
right.
And that she's drowning in his. But Tony Wolfe is then a shamanic guide or a WSI water safety instructor certified lifeguard,
Hmm.
which puts the check and balance in place so Jung can go deeper and
Absolutely.
he can relieve himself of the acceptable risk factors or the fact that any risk needs to be acceptable. He can go into uncharted waters, and if necessary, she can pull him out.
Yeah,
And then he can forget about all that, which means when you shed that fear, you can go deeper. But she's kind of a lifeguard, a shamanic guide, just a life preserver if necessary. I mean, like scuba, they have now you pull the string with the nitrous and it inflates and you go up. The problem is if you're too far down, you're going to give yourself the bends, but at the same time, it's safety. So I think
Yeah,
she was there as his partner in that sense.
right. Now, important question is asked here, which is, so what does the wave of blood mean? And Cameron responds, um, he sensed the approaching war, maybe. And that's absolutely true. Jung did write in the Red Book right at the beginning that that he was getting precognition, dreams, and visions of the war. And that led to his discovery of the collective unconscious, which is incredibly important to us all the time, and certainly now to understand what the collective unconscious was. But Jung was incredibly tuned in to what was going on in the collective unconscious in Europe during these months, which were the 7 months before the beginning of World War One, or 9 months before, but especially the visions were coming to him from Christmas Day um, of 1913. And so, uh, and also our psyche doesn't communicate with us in words. It communicates. It's way more ancient than words ever existed, and so it presents you with a symbol that is a visual symbol of something that you need to be aware of. Okay, now the example I have is that I've never needed a radar detector. And the reason is because whenever the police is doing a speed trap, um, I know it's coming before I get to it, probably a minute or two before. And I know it because my unconscious serves up a vision of a police black and white going across in front of me from right to left with the words police on the side, word police on this side of this black and white. And whenever I see that image, I know I'm going to see police activity in the physical world within a minute or two, and it never fails. It never fails. So my psyche, in the old days, that might have been a tiger, that somebody would envision a tiger, and immediately they would be put on notice that there was a tiger in the area, and they're picking up on unconscious signs that um, that's the case, that there's a predator in the area. I don't mean to call the police predators, but that's sort of the way this works, is that my black and white is a symbol for me to be careful. Okay,
Well, if I read,
something's going on unconsciously. For example, people are flashing their lights, or the cars change their speed um, very little, but enough so that your unconscious picks up on it. The oncoming cars in your direction also just change their speed just enough so your unconscious picks up on it, and it says danger. Okay.
yeah, and if I take the hermeneutics of predator, then I'm an air traffic controller, and what you're saying is, okay, it's not incoming, it's not enemy, it's influence on the radar. There's something blipping over there. So you have environmental awareness before something happens, and it's really not precognition. I think you're just seeing further what you haven't experienced in this. I can see it with my eyes here, because I
Right.
think the one concept that I find vastly interesting that I just read 2 weeks ago, someone says someone said the eyes are exposed brain, and that really landed as a, oh my, wow,
Yeah.
because it just went places. And then what happens is the brain, we have all these senses, And I find the sixth sense, whether this is accurate or not, the sixth sense is just the five senses interdependently working in this seamless unit and group that together, all of them make the sixth sense together. And then you experience or feel or literally sense further. So when you, oh, I'm in a speed trap. Well, the hermeneutics, the interpretation, you're in your car. You don't want the momentum stopped. So adjust the speed, understand what's in your environment. And I have the same thing. I've never had a speeding ticket ever. And that doesn't mean I have always driven at or below the speed limit by any means. But there was always the, oh no, I'm free, run. And then, oh, time to shut it down. So I think that whole air traffic control radar, you're really speaking to the air traffic control radar, where you're simply environmentally aware that's upcoming, that's up the road. It's in the whole context. I can't see it, but on my screen, metaphorically, I feel it.
Right. And I was just looking for the passage. It's actually in chapter 1 of the Red Book. I can't find the words exactly right now, but so okay, I'm not finding it just now, but just know that's where we are. Is we're talking about something that's in the very first chapter of the Red Book, and so let me go on here. Lost my place. All right. So, all right. So in the beginning, when I wrote these things, Jung told Agnella Jaffe in 1957, there was this voice whispering to me, this is art. But he would not accept it. He forcefully countered that it was not art, that it was nature. This is an enigmatic distinction, and it needs further explanation. Jung perceived that through a concentrated engagement with imagination, fantasy, and vision, he had gained entry into an autonomous realm of nature. It was real. It was independent of his will, and it had a tale to tell. What he recorded was not his artistic creation, though his illuminated portfolio volume can certainly be viewed as a work of art. Whatever artfulness materialized within Liber Novus was, in Jung's understanding, a voice of nature. During the early months of 1914, the events he recorded often presented with a portentous prophetic tone, but by spring, the vision slowly abated and then ceased entirely with the coming of summer. Jung recognized that he had been gifted with something extraordinary. However, what he should do with it or how to further interpret it remained obscure. When the First World War erupted in August 1914, his interpretation of the experience and his journal record took a radical turn. Jung immediately recognized that what he had seen, heard, and recorded over the preceding months did indeed contain a prophecy. By willful engagement with the autonomous natural functions of vision and imagination, he had been shown the way of what is to come. Jung now confronted strong evidence that his visionary venture had not been of solely personal or subjective import. It was epical, and the account he had recorded was a revelation. It was the core of a new book to be addressed to a new age. Over ensuing months, Jung composed a 1,000-page handwritten draft of this new book. Into it, he transcribed the visionary events recorded in his journals, adding to them an additional layer of reflection and commentary. This was the culmination of Jung's initial hermeneutics of the visions, the essential condensation of his visionary experience into sensuous form. His interpretative journey with this primal record would, however, move through several further phases. Indeed, this hermeneutic enterprise became his life's hidden work. The revelation was not, however, finished in 1914, as Jung may have then supposed. After concluding the initial drafts and beginning the formal calligraphic transcription of his record, in late summer 1915, a second wave of visionary and imaginative experiences commenced. During this latter period, which extended his manuscript record through 1916, the revelatory and prophetic tenor of the account was further augmented. This latter part of the revelation is recorded in the final section of Liber Novus, titled Scrutinies, which Jung drafted in 1917. During this period, Philemon became a central figure in his imaginative encounters. The nature of Jung's relationship with Philemon was hinted at in Memories, Dreams, Reflections. Jung stated in that memoir, at times he, Philemon, seemed to me quite real, as if he were a living personality. I went walking up and down the garden with him, and to me, he was what the Indians call a guru. However, in private comments to Carrie Baines in 1923, Jung described Philemon as something ineffably greater. He was, in multiform manifestation, an avatar of the master, the same who inspired Buddha, Mani, Christ, Mohammed, all those who may be said to have communed with God. Above Philemon's image on folio 154 of the Red Book, a page completed around 1924, Jung penned an appellation in Greek, quote, Father of the Prophets, beloved Philemon, unquote. A few years later, on the enormous mural painting of Philemon at his Bollingen Tower, Jung added a similar tribute, quote, Philemon, the prophet's primal father, unquote. Okay, then there's another section. Comments here?
Yeah, I think in terms of hermeneutics too, I think unpack it a little and make it more, hopefully more useful to me, to you, to the audience on YouTube, that hermeneutics, dealing with interpretation, think about Hermes, Mercury, Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice born. Well, the operative metaphor there is the thrice born is in every identity as a trinity, the three. But then communication itself, in terms of hermeneutics, think about Mercury, Gemini, communication. Communication itself is an interpretation of inner contents that are driven to words and or images. So you are hermeneutically speaking when you speak, simply because you're interpreting your inner contents. And Jung, in this sense, was not interpreting the inner contents, he was pouring them specifically. So I think there's a difference between clarity and specificity, where he's pouring what came out of the pore, not filtering it as it came.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to stop this section of today's session
That's a good.
because the next part is called a Book of Revelation, and it's going to involve a lot more discussion. And because I have an important session this afternoon with our confluence, and let me put the link. If you went out now and watched this video, you would have the first session of the confluence and be able to see it before we start this afternoon at 1 p.m. Eastern time.
Give my regards to everyone. I'll be at work today.
Right.
So
Okay, but there are a few other things that are in the YouTube chat here. I think it's worthwhile to just go back and read them. I'm not going to read them all because there's quite a lot that people have added here. And let's see, Aristotle in Bottle says there is no God before God and no God after him. And I would say that that comment is a metaphorical way of referring to my point that there no scientist ever created any of the rules of nature. Okay. All those rules of nature have been discovered by scientists, but they have never created a single one.
yeah.
And we actually covered that at the beginning of yesterday's session for our confluence. And so
So again, that's about observation. They didn't create what they saw. They saw. So there's the, oh, look, I saw this. That's also the participatio mystique. That's each of us bringing back what we each only can in our way that no one else could have. And simply because it's ours. And then we share it.
yeah. And let's see. Well, there are a lot of good comments here. I urge you all to look at them, and we will pick this up again next week. I'm sorry to feel rushed, but
I
we
think it's
do.
important too, the revelation piece. It's only a page long, but it's a packed page. So as soon as we touch it, it's going to open up. So
Yeah. And yeah, and Christopher says, I recognize the building behind Skip. It was built by C.G. himself on his estate in Switzerland, I believe. Well, it wasn't actually on his Kusnacht estate. It was 15 miles farther up the lake than at Kusnacht. And it was a building, Jung was creating in stone a proof of what he was talking about. And so it was entirely about accessing the unconscious. This building, which is called Bollingen, is, is not plumbed, and it has no electricity. And the only, as Jung said, the only thing a man of the 20th century would see that wouldn't be what a 16th century person would see is the matches. Everything else he tried to keep pure as without having the inputs of modern life in it. And so there's no plumbing, there's no electricity. It is just, you know, Jung would work with, a lamp or something like that, a gas lamp or something like that. Yeah.
and I think what's interesting there is Jung created the fuel of his environment itself was his driver, so that he was nestled in the home of self, which nestled in self, etc., onion skinning in. But the old quote of art drives culture, technology simply supports it. He was taking out all those expectations of support. And the same as a 14th century man or woman, then he's living with nature. He has the old African proverb, a roof over your head is wise. He's not always affected by every blast of the wind, every zephyr, storm, rain, sleet, snow, shine, what have you. He can have the contemplation inside, undisturbed in the home, but he is in nature, not shielding himself with electricity and central air and heat and water and et cetera, et cetera. So that I really appreciate then the stone and the wood and just how things went together, the metal, the nails. It's literally he stone masoned an environment that he lived in. So he was living
Absolutely.
simply in nature, and that's a wonderfully powerful thing to do, to remove the trappings of modernity.
Yeah. And he would go out there for months at a time. So Christopher says, Jung understood the need to create, to heal thyself. To destroy illustrates a mental sickness. And I think that's fair enough to point out that in order to heal yourself, you need to be creating, not destroying. And it's well to think about that in terms of our modern life today and our current affairs.
I really appreciate that comment. Thank you.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of people say, oh, it's the creation and the destruction. And the thing is, that's then being too philosophical about the effluence, about the shedded skins that the snake doesn't miss. So I like that you kept with the creation, because when you deal with the destruction, you're living in the past. And to me, a seed, for example, the simplest example, a seed germinates. Right. Immediately, the husk is compost. The husk is trash.
Yeah.
And if you concentrate on the trash, you're going to get trash, But right. What happens if you germinate with the seed and you grow? That's the creation piece. So I think it's important to understand that, we root in death, so to speak, and in destruction, but the creation is more important.
Right. And
kept present.
Okay. And so please note that all of our confluences have had as the first part of the title, the creator's art. And that's the point. And so today at 1 p.m., we continue with the creator's art. Yesterday's intro version is here. And I'm going to give the link again so you can catch up with where we are, or most of where we are, before this session begins about an hour and 20 minutes from now. And so I hope you'll take a look. And if you haven't seen us yesterday. And I know Jordan has to go into the plaza, and today is an important work day.
Yeah, I've got a really mean boss. I keep making myself go to work every damn day. I mean, what's up with that? I don't know.
Yeah. And so what was I going to say? I guess it's yeah. So as Christopher says, we are all creators. Get to work, my brothers and sisters. And
get to work living life.
Right. And we're all creators. We have to create the world in which we want to live. It's not some abstract place that you can't touch. The world is here now. Okay. So is heaven, so is hell. They're all here now. And so it's our responsibility, every single one of us, to create the world we want to live in. You can't just say, oh, somebody else is going to take care of it, because they won't. They don't.
And also not to play the victim. I think a lot of people think, oh, I have to heal first. I have to do this first before that's fine as a kid. You have to mow the lawn or do the dishes before you're allowed to go to the pool. But as an adult, I know those dishes are going to be waiting for me when I get home from the pool.
Yeah.
So you live things into being. And I think a lot of people, and I was guilty of this for years. Oh, I have to do this before I can do that. I have to
Yeah.
heal this before I. The thing is, that's rumination. That's that's paying attention to the traumas and the past events that grows them. Go figure. If a gardener
Yeah.
pays attention to one part of the garden, that part of the garden is the strongest part of the garden. And so
Sure.
when you pay attention to and ruminate about the past, you're playing the victim, and the future and the present tense is diminished and actually rotted. And so I find that living your life into being, you can use all those past things as influence. They also can just be rocks in the river that you just navigate around. And then I think you're not at prey. You're no more at the mercy of your past than you are of old photo albums.
Yeah.
Go out and take more pictures, And I think that's important to stay present, because then everything that happened to you up to now brought you up to now. And not that, I'm saying I'm thankful for some of the things that happened, betrayals and blah, 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 but they did. And so now the rejection piece has no dejection. I'm like, no, that just simply happened. And I don't need to add any kind of quality to it other than the experience of it happened. So the
Yeah.
create, could you read the comment back about that was staying with the creation part rather than the destruction? Because I
Yeah.
think that
Just a
comment
minute.
bears repeating. It was phrased really well, and I like the focus on, and death and destruction's there, but it's the foundation and not
Right.
the leading
Well,
edge.
Christopher Raymond said, Jung understood the need to create, to heal thyself. To destroy illustrates a mental sickness. And I think it's well for all of us to remember that.
Yeah.
Um, and
Right.
there was one other thing that he said. We are all creators. Get to work, my brothers and sisters. Now, Aristotle in the bottle made one point. Shiva is both a destroyer and a creator. And the point is that um, both creation and destruction are part of the universe. Just look out there and you'll see lots of stars that are crashing together and that sort of thing. But we do it in our own families and so on. And
And I think it's important there to understand that Shiva Shakti piece, because yes, this creation and destruction. There's the Uranian tectonic magma, lava, emerging undercurrents. That's always going on. Then, more importantly, back to Christopher Raymond's comment, what is generated from that?
yeah,
So all that's going on, and then the germination, the
yeah,
creation.
nothing is ever destroyed, by the way,
Exactly. It's
right?
utilized,
Every
transformed.
atom in the universe is being utilized every minute, every
Conservation.
atom,
Yeah.
and it was never destroyed. It changed its purpose, perhaps it was transformed, but it was not destroyed. Um, and let's see, there were a couple of other things I wanted to read while you're still here. Cameron says, thank you, Skip and Jordan. I've learned so much from you today. I needed to hear this. And then
You're welcome. Appreciate
Wave
it.
Wave comments, didn't Jung invent the idea of synchronicity? No, he did not invent synchronicity. Synchronicity has been with us all along since the beginning of our species. He only described synchronicity and the power of it and the numinosity of it and so on.
And T.S. Eliot said there's nothing new, but everything must be made original. So there's a whole utilizing the wisdom within again.
Right. And
I
then
appreciate that.
Aristotle makes the comment, the two eternal source, TWO, spenta manu and angra manu, or source of good and source of evil, source of creation and source of destruction, says Zarathustra. Well, actually, every time a good is created, an evil is created with it. It's not a question of two creators, it's one creator. One creator. And every time there's anything that happens, there will be an equal and opposite reaction. That's what we see every day in our politics. And so anyway, okay, I have to excuse myself and move on. And have a good day. How hot has it been in Taos, by the way? I can't hear you, Jordan.
High 80s, low 90s.
Okay.
But nice breeze. You asked, last week, what do I have a place to go if it gets too hot? And honestly, I've got an 8-foot diameter umbrella
Mm-hmm.
and over my table, and I just move it to track the sun. And honestly, if you get out in the sun, you can scorch. You get in the shade, and with a little bit of breeze, it's just ideal.
Yeah. Okay. Uh, so Aristotle, I did not remember that from Zarathustra, but Zarathustra had so many things um, that Jung did a 5-year series of lectures, 89 2-hour lectures on Zarathustra, and it's all written up in a book. And Zarathustra itself is 200 pages long, and the book of Jung's commentary is 1,600 pages. So
So
there's a
talk
lot,
about some mansplaining, and that's
yeah, there's a lot. We have to go on. So